Oxytocin and prolactin are two hormones that are mostly involved in the production and release of milk from the breasts during the nursing period. With prolactin, pro means for, and lactin refers to milk, because it stimulates the production of milk. Oxytocin has a different role because it makes the smooth muscle cells around the glands in the breasts contract, and this kind of pushes out the milk. Oxytocin also helps the muscle in the uterus to contract during labour to help get the baby out. Both of these hormones are synthesised all the way up in the brain by two interconnected structures, the hypothalamus and pituitary gland. So basically, the hypothalamus is a part of the brain made up of several nuclei, which are clusters of neurons. Two of these nuclei are called the supraoptic and the paraventricular nuclei, and these contain neurons that secrete oxytocin, as well as some other hormones like vasopressin or antidiuretic hormone. Antidiuretic hormone is involved in regulating the amount of water in the body. Anyway, when oxytocin is produced, it travels down the axons of these neurons and reaches the posterior lobe of the pituitary gland. Down the length of these axons, there are little lumps that are actually small dilatations called herring bodies, and these herring bodies store the oxytocin until it's released in the blood. Outside of pregnancy, oxytocin levels are actually pretty low, but production increases just a little bit, funnily enough, during an orgasm. But the other hormone that we're talking about, prolactin, is synthesised by special cells called lactotrophs, and these are in the anterior lobe of the pituitary, not the posterior, where the oxytocin is stored and released. So, in women that are not pregnant or breastfeeding, or in men, prolactin levels are usually kept pretty well in check by the hypothalamus, which does it in two ways. The first way is the most important, and it's when the hypothalamus secretes a constant stream of dopamine, which is called prolactin inhibiting factor. So what dopamine does is it binds to specific receptors on the lactotrophs and it inhibits the release of prolactin. So that's the first thing the hypothalamus does, but I hear what you're saying. What's the second thing? Well, I'll tell you. The hypothalamus secretes something called thyrotropin releasing hormone, which is also called prolactin releasing hormone, which, as you guessed, can stimulate prolactin release. Both oxytocin and prolactin bind to receptors on cells on the breasts, so let's just take a closer look at them. Each breast is made up of 15 to 20 lobules, and each lobule consists of clusters of hollow alveoli lined by a single layer of milk-secreting epithelial cells. Each lobule continues with a lactiferous duct, which is also lined with contractile myoepithelial cells, and it opens at the nipple. Now, during pregnancy, oxytocin and prolactin, along with estrogen and progesterone, which are produced by the placenta, together stimulate the growth of milk-producing alveoli. And in turn, this makes the breasts themselves grow and prepare for lactation. However, the high levels of estrogen and progesterone required to maintain pregnancy actually inhibit the production of milk until the baby's born. It's a pretty clever system. Oxytocin takes centre stage during labour. Labour starts with dilatation of the cervix, which is the lowermost part of the uterus. When the cervix dilates, this sends signals to the hypothalamus to produce more oxytocin. In turn, oxytocin dilates the cervix more, so that the baby has enough room to pass through. This is a cracking example of a positive feedback cycle, because one event stimulates the other. And after the cervix has dilated enough, oxytocin makes the muscular layer of the uterus contract periodically, and this helps to push the baby out through the vagina and into the world. Just beautiful. After the baby's born, the placenta detaches from the uterine wall, and this leads to a drop in estrogen and progesterone levels. This means that it's finally time for prolactin to take centre stage and stimulate those milk-secreting epithelial cells. There's a bit more positive feedback here, because breastfeeding also increases prolactin levels, and because of that, milk production increases for the duration of nursing. Apart from doing a great job in milk production, high levels of prolactin also inhibit the release of gonadotropin releasing hormone from the hypothalamus, and this results in decreased luteinizing hormone, or LH, and follicle stimulating hormone, or FSH, produced by the anterior pituitary. Now, if you're familiar with the normal roles of FSH and LH, then you'll know that normally they induce the development of ovarian follicles and ovulation, which is why women typically don't ovulate or have menstrual periods while they're breastfeeding. Now, when the baby begins suckling at the breasts, the tactile receptors in the nipple send a signal to the hypothalamus, which responds by producing oxytocin in pulses, sometimes more and sometimes less. This oxytocin then binds to oxytocin receptors in the myoepithelial cells, which causes them to contract and eject the milk in a pulsatile pumping manner, and this promotes the maximum emptying of milk. It's like repeatedly squeezing and releasing a wet sponge until there's no water left in it, although that's probably not the nicest analogy. But fear not, prolactin levels increase, so the breasts fill up with milk again just in time for the baby's next meal. Okay, so that was a quick overview of oxytocin and prolactin. Let's just go over some of the key points. Oxytocin and prolactin are two hormones produced by the hypothalamus and the pituitary gland. During pregnancy, these hormones prepare the breasts for lactation by stimulating the maturation of the milk-secreting alveoli. During childbirth, oxytocin comes into play because it dilates the cervix and helps the uterus to contract, which forces the baby out. After the baby's born, oxytocin and prolactin are the cornerstone of lactation. Prolactin stimulates milk production, while oxytocin makes the muscle cells contract and push the milk out of the breasts during breastfeeding.